Chapter 626 Start of the War. Meteor-sized stones weighing thousands of pounds were thrown into the air, colliding with the approaching sea of black in the atmosphere. As the enormous stones approached the dark sea composed of thousands and thousands of demons, a black tint emerged in the air, combining into a large transparent screen that served to block the incoming boulders. Unfortunately for the demons, the boulders proved far more powerful than expected, smashing through the massive energy field and crashing into the demons, sending them tumbling against the ground. Boom. The ground fiercely shook as more and more boulders came crashing against the ground. It was uncertain how many demons a single rock killed, but there were over 100 boulders being thrown at the same time, quickly slicing away at the dark sea of demons. Reload. Silig's booming voice echoed across the vast plain as his form stood towering in front of all the legions. The legions behind him worked together to replenish the catapults. They were extremely efficient in transporting and loading the rocks onto the catapult. By the time they threw a boulder, the next one would be ready within the next couple of minutes. In spite of this, "It's not enough," Silig muttered to himself, his forehead tensely wrinkling. He was unsatisfied with how things were going. Looking at the approaching demon army, he knew he'd soon be compelled to abandon the catapults and fight on with his weapons. The situation looked good now, but he knew that it was bound to change soon. They didn't have much time at their disposal. Halt! Silig lifted his hand and ordered the catapults to stop. The orcs came to a halt at his commands as they all dropped whatever they were doing and got back into formations. Silig nodded in approval when he observed this. Good. He was pleased with what he was seeing. He didn't waste the past few decades training the orcs for nothing. Get into fighting positions. Silig's voice boomed once more. The orcs followed his commands and got into fighting formations. Every group of 4 in the legions had a heavy orc. Orcs who wore massive and burly armor that weighed thousands of pounds. The intent behind this was to make it impossible for demons to lift them up in the air to then drop them on the ground. They essentially served as tanks and bore the grunt of the demons' attack. It was this type of formation that helped the orcs survive until now. They are coming. The demons approached the orcs like a swarm of locusts. A real and formless pressure erupted from each demon's body, mixing and generating a frightening pressure that resembled a vast tsunami, eager to tear anything in its path apart. Silig's runes flashed as he stared at the spectacle from afar, and his crimson tint spread and mingled with the green hue coming directly from his body. His muscles expanded and an overbearing force began to emerge from deep within his body. Get ready. His words echoed across the vast expanse of land, igniting the battle spirit of all the legions behind him and driving them to thump their weapons on the ground. The ground fiercely shook and the orcs brought their weapons forward. Silig shifted his attention away from the legion behind him and instead concentrated on the vast sea of darkness that was drawing nearer. He thrust his foot forward and raised his enormous axe into the air. The pressure that was coming out from his body further increased, and an intimidating feeling rose from him. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Time appeared to slow down abruptly as Silig was able to obtain a better view of the demons that were rushing towards him with vicious and ravenous gazes, all looking thirsty for his flesh. In particular, his attention was drawn toward a demon who was ahead of the others, directly aiming for him. The demon's might was palpable, on a par with his own, and immediately made him wary. Hoo! Silig took a deep breath and shouted, "Attack!" He swung with his axe immediately after saying those words, and a horrifying force tumbled out of his axe, aiming straight for the approaching demon. The power that was contained within the attack was so great that several of the demons that were within the vicinity of the attack were instantly annihilated simply by being in close proximity to it. Even the demon that was on equal footing with Silig was able to sense how menacing Silig's onslaught was, and its expression altered. It was unfortunately too late for the demon to dodge the attack as it was already upon him by the time it knew it. The speed of the attack was simply frightening. In the end, the demon was compelled to confront the assault head-on, and as a result, a potent force began to flow out of its body. This force merged with the surrounding air before converging to form an enormous pitch-black barrier. Boom! The attack crashed into the barrier erected by the demon, causing the surrounding area to tremble as a thundering noise rippled throughout the whole battlefield. It was this exact noise that marked the start of the war. Are we just going to look at the war without doing anything? I heard Liam's voice enter my ears while I gazed at the ongoing war from the safety of the castle in the distance. Sparing him a glance, I replied, "Of course not." "Why?" "Because if the two of us act now, the other demons will learn of our strength and avoid immediately assaulting us. As I previously stated, we must entice the demons to come to us, and the only way to do so is to demonstrate a strength that is scary enough for them to feel pressured, while also presenting them with a circumstance in which coming to us is preferable to staying holed up in their castles." The concept wasn't hard. My current goal was to have the demons come to us and have them stop doing whatever they are planning on doing. This alone would help us secure a small advantage and avoid getting us in a disadvantageous position. However, that was easier said than done. If I showed them strength that was much too frightening for them to handle, they would undoubtedly hole themselves up within their own castles and wait for whatever it was they were expecting to come. Worse, they may wind up reporting this to the higher demons, making the situation even worse than it needed to be. If that happened, our condition would become tremendously disadvantageous. What I needed to do right now was help the orcs win the war in a reasonably convincing way. In a sense, this would make the demons feel intimidated by us and make them believe that striking us while we were recovering was the greatest option for them. And for that to happen, the Orson side had to take a few losses, hence why I wasn't doing anything yet. "I don't understand." Liam scratched the back of his head. "You don't have to know." I patted Liam on the shoulder and headed back into the castle. On my way back inside, I heard Angelica's voice. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to train. Call me back when it looks like the orcs are losing." I left without waiting for them to reply. My current priority was to train at the moment. I couldn't let myself lag behind because of everything that was happening. I mustn't forget what happened a while back. With Malik. Weck. Just as I was about to enter my room, my head began to ache horribly and my vision became blurry. A wet sensation trickled down my nose, forcing me to lean against the side of the wall. Shit, not again. I was having another attack. Ack. I began to stumble on my steps. My vision grew increasingly more unstable and my breathing became rougher. Just what in the world is happening to me? These attacks. They had been going on for months with no indication of stopping, becoming worse with each attack. It hurt. It really hurt. Hooer. As I got closer to the door that led to my room, I took a full breath in and held it for a moment before releasing it all at once. After that, I opened the door to my room, and hastily shut the door behind me before collapsing to the floor. Thud. Cage. On the floor, my entire body began to convulse. Fortunately, this only lasted for a short period of time since I was able to restore control of my body after a handful of seconds. However, by the time I recovered, I caught sight of what appeared to be a couple of feet in front of me. My eyes shot wide open. "Who is it?" And I abruptly sat up, only to be left speechless by the fact that no one was present in the room. Was it just my imagination? Scanning the room with my eyes and finding that no one was around, I was left wondering whether everything was merely an illusion. But just as I was going to accept this thought, my hand rocketed toward my neck area. Huh. I was left stunned by this sudden movement, but I was quick to react as my other hand shot up and grasped the wrist of my right hand. Thukr. As I exerted all of my strength to get my other hand away from my neck, I saw that my hand had begun to shake. My other hand was only a few of inches away from my neck, and at that very moment I could sense that my life was dangling by a thread. Just one little push. Ugh. Crack. After summoning all of my strength, a bone-crushing sound echoed and my hand jerked in the incorrect direction. Huh, ha. Sweat began to drop down from the side of my face as I took deep breaths, trying my best to recover from the sudden situation. What was that? The pain that was engulfing my arm was not something that entirely bothered me, as I was already used to pain by this point. What bothered me the most was the fact that I had almost died. Fucker. My teeth gnashed together. I wasn't stupid to the point of not understanding what had just happened. This was a warning. A warning that my other self just gave me. I'm slowly taking control of your body. This was the message my other self was trying to say to me. Only by taking deep breaths was I able to calm the seething rage that was building from deep within my body. I then opened my eyes and cleared my mind of any other ideas while also ensuring that I was in full control of my body. Looks like the situation is clear for now. 10 minutes had passed since, and by then I was sure that I was in full control of my body. During that time I was able to formulate an opinion regarding the attacks. Could the attacks have been caused by my other self attempting to take over my body? Now that I thought about it, this indeed seemed like a plausible explanation. I immediately grew warier. I slapped the side of my cheeks. Shit. Now is not the time to worry about this. Ignoring the fact that my hand was broken, I took out several crystal orbs from my dimensional space. The room, which was thin on mana, started to fluctuate. I need to focus on what's important right now, and that is improving my strength. With the mana in this world lacking, one might find it difficult to have their strength rise. There was one way to bypass this problem. Albeit it was something that only the richest of people could afford to do. And that was by directly absorbing the mana inside of cores. Yes, the same cores that were extremely expensive and rarely dropped from monsters. In my hand was the same exact core of the S rank. It cost me a pretty penny, and the way I was using it was a total waste of its usage, but I have no choice. This is the only way I can attain a source of mana in a world where mana is lacking. Inside the core was a concentrated mass of mana that could be used to train upon smashing it. This method was highly inefficient because mana didn't just stay in the atmosphere forever, as it tended to be absorbed by everything in its area, but it was the only alternative I had, and it was just about enough for me. All right. I took another long breath while observing the core in my hand before ultimately crushing it in the palm of my hand. Crack. A surge of mana exploded from the core, spilling from the small cracks that formed around the core, totally engulfing the room. I quickly closed my eyes and absorbed all of the mana in the air. Chapter 627 Start of the War, 3. Monolith Headquarters. Hemlock silently peered beneath the building from the broad window of the room in a lovely area at the top of the headquarters that had been restored throughout the years following the incident in the past. The one involving a certain numbered individual. The room he was in was quite spacious, roughly the size of a dining hall. There was a wide red carpet covering the floor, and several paintings were hung along the walls on either side of the room. With his hands behind his back, Hemlock quietly spoke in an audible tone. Jinhao, do you think I'm crazy? Crazy. Sat on a black sofa in the middle of the room was Emo Jinhao, the vice leader of the monolith. His drowsy gray eyes, which were completely devoid of any pupils, flickered as he rested his body back against the sofa. What suddenly brought up this topic? Did something happen? No, nothing at all. Hemlock shook his head before he turned his body around. It's just that I went to see an old buddy of mine, and while I was there I started to reflect on the choices I've made in the past, but in the end, no matter how much I think about it, I can't see myself being wrong. What I'm doing right now is the only thing that has any chance of saving the human race. This must have been one of the motivations for you to join the monolith, right? No. Emo Jinhao shook his head while looking at Hemlock. The sole reason I decided to become a member of the monolith was because I desired to continue living. I do not share the same concern you have for the welfare of other people. They can all die for all I care. I see. Hemlock quietly nodded to himself as he listened to Emo Jinhao's words. So you joined the monolith because you wanted to survive? Reasonable. After all, there was no other way to survive in this harsh world other than to join the demons. The people of this world were much too stupid to recognize the harsh reality that was standing right in front of them, despite the fact that it was right before their noses. Shaking his head once more, Hemlock changed the topic. How are the preparations for the war? We're almost ready. Emo Jinhao replied. All of our S rankers and the elderly are ready for combat. I've also managed to heal myself from the injuries that I sustained a few years back. Emo Jinhao clenched his fists into a ball and spat through his gnashed teeth. I can't wait to see 876 again. For what he did in the past, you'll see how brutal his death will be. The air in the room fluctuated. 876? Hemlock's eyes suddenly jumped up a little. Focusing his attention on Jinhao, he said. Talking about him, I've already met him back when I was visiting my friend. You did? Emo Jinhao jumped up from the sofa. As a result of his actions, Hemlock lowered his hand in a move to convey to him that he should calm down. Calm down, I didn't do anything to him. We are still in a truce, there's no way I can touch him at the moment. I understand. Emo Jinhao replied as his face calmed down. However, it was precisely at this time when Hemlock cocked his head to the side and examined Emo Jinhao's body in great detail. Yes. Hemlock scratched the bottom of his chin without replying. He then mumbled. If you really want to get your revenge on 876, you might have a tougher time than you think. At the moment he's not the same as he was in Knock. There was a sudden knock on the door. Leader, I have an urgent message. A terrified and frantic voice sounded right after. Meeting his gaze with Mo Jinhao's, they both simultaneously redirected their sights to the door. Come in. Mo Jinhao responded in Hemlock's place, and the door opened to display the features of a young man with short black hair and a lanky figure. He was currently perspiring heavily from the side of his face while clinging to a stack of papers that he was carrying in his hands. His face became noticeably paler the instant he walked into the room and his gaze settled on Jinhao and Hemlock. He then lowered his head and reported. Emergency report. It has been revealed that a number of contracted individuals have passed away for no apparent reason. After conducting additional studies, we discovered that the demons they had a contract with have since been eliminated, which is the likely cause of their deaths. After looking through the database, it has been determined that the demons who have vanished are the same ones who were accountable for converting the Union members during the most recent gathering that they had. The young man said everything in a single breath. When he finished and raised his head, he was startled to discover that Jinhao's and Hemlock's expressions were more grave than anyone else's could possibly be. You may leave. Before he could say anything else, with a single wave of Jinhao's hand, the young man was thrown out of the room. When the doors were finally locked, there was an immediate increase in the level of tension within the room. We have a spy within our ranks. Mo Jinhao was the first one to speak as he expressed his opinion. I believe so too. Hemlock gave a nod of approval as he waved his hand and shifted the papers that were lying on the floor in his direction. He then continued to remain quiet while the documents floated up to his hand and were examined by him before he finally spoke again. With the targets being so specific and with the deaths of the demons that were supposed to not be known by anyone, it is reasonable to assume that there is a spy among us. The tension in the room rose as Hemlock's brows started to furrow even more. At this same instant he had a startling flashback to the words that His Highness had said to him a couple of years ago, and as a result his demeanor changed. He issued a command by tapping on his watch. Someone call for Everblood. I would like to meet him. Understood. He got a reply not long after he sent the message. Mo Jinhao, who was silently sitting back in his chair, inquired. Why did you ask Everblood to come here? I have my reasons. Hemlock replied without saying anything else. In the end, seeing how adamant Hemlock was at not speaking, Jinhao could only give up. Knock. It wasn't long until someone knocked on the door again and a raspy voice echoed. Have you called for me? Come in. Hemlock gestured him with his hand. As soon as the door was opened, a humanoid entity in black entered the space. The demon, in contrast to everyone else who came into the presence of both Jinhao and Hemlock, seemed to take their presence in stride as he made himself at home. What have you called me here for? He asked while he sat on the sofa opposite to Jinhao. His relaxed attitude caused Jinhao to frown. He nevertheless remained quiet. There was a hierarchy and the demons were always ahead of their contractors in terms of importance. It was the sad reality for those who decided to join the demons. It was fortunate to know that Hemlock didn't seem to mind Everblood's attitude as he asked. Recent reports have indicated that a considerable number of the spies operating in the human domain have vanished. I was wondering whether you were aware of what was going on there, seeing as you are a demon and you are in charge of watching over that area. Hemlock was straightforward with his question as he directly asked Everblood the crux of the problem. I do. And so was Everblood, who promptly nodded his head. Jinhao and Hemlock took a minute to comprehend Everblood's remarks, and when they did they were surprised. You do. Never did they expect him to reveal it so easily. I do, and I was just about to come to you to inform you of the situation. Everblood drummed his fingers on the armrest of the sofa. Hemlock, who was watching him from the side, took a couple of steps forward. Jinhao and I were speculating that there is a spy within our mid. It's not that. Everblood cut Hemlock mid-sentence. The real culprit behind everything that is happening has nothing to do with a spy. Rather, the answer is much simpler than you think. With a small pause, Everblood mumbled. Oh. Hemlock raised his brow. He was now curious. Who might this culprit be? Hemlock calmly asked. Everblood responded in a direct manner while leaning back in his chair and giving him a sideways glance. The culprit behind everything is none other than Kevin Voss. Everblood had been inside the executive room for 2 hours at this point. Nobody outside the room knew what they were talking about during that period, but judging from how eerie, silent and tense the environment was outside the room, it was most likely very sensitive information that they were discussing. Everblood emerged from the chamber on his own just when the clock indicated that 2 hours had gone. As he came out, there was no one else behind him. As he exited the chamber, he was greeted with the sight of a lengthy corridor that was only a few feet wide. As he moved forward another step, a figure materialized next to him. Chains were dangling from the arms and legs of the figure in question. "It's almost time." A hoarse and cold voice echoed throughout the halls. In spite of how loud the voice was, the only one who could hear the voice was Everblood. He promptly replied inside of his mind. "Only a few weeks left until the truce ends. All of the arrangements over the past few years have been made." "That's good," replied the figure that walked beside him while the long set of chains hanging from his arms and legs scraped the ground behind him. "My goal may have changed and I won't be able to take over my body for a bit, but that no longer matters." The voice became colder, sending shivers down Everblood's spine. "As long as Kevin dies, everything will be solved. Don't worry, I'll make sure to get the job done." Everblood responded in his consciousness as his feet came to a halt in front of a specific room. The door opened with a flick of his wrist, and he entered alongside the enigmatic person. Greeting Everblood upon entering the room was a sight that made him smile. "With everything we've prepared, I have no doubt in our chances of completing our goal." Chapter 628: A Glimpse of the Records. 1. The sky was filled with a brilliant and enormous orange sun. The size of the sun was so enormous that it appeared to fill up half of the sky, turning the blue sky a muted orange color as a result. A little table in white was perched on top of a vibrant patch of foliage. Jezebeth observed the landscape in front of him while he relaxed on a small chair. "Human tea isn't too bad." He held a small teacup in his hand, one that was opaque black in color and only filled halfway with a transparent green substance. Jezebeth refilled his cup with more tea as he observed the calm and peaceful setting that had descended upon the surrounding places. "Isn't this nice?" Jezebeth muttered something under his breath as he removed the teacup from his grasp and placed it on the table. The scenery before him was stunning. Jezebeth felt this location to be very calming due to the presence of the enormous mountains in the distance that extended all the way to the clouds and the birds that could be heard chirping all around him. A pleasant breeze was blowing through his body as he looked off into the distance and saw large trees that towered over the landscape. Everything felt so peaceful and tranquil, especially when compared to the demon world, which felt rather stuffy for him. Jezebeth, while silently mumbling to himself, picked up the teacup with his hand once again and crossed his legs. "It pains me to know that I will soon have to bring about the destruction of this world. If it had been feasible, I would have kept it, but unfortunately, in order for me to do what I set out to do, I have no choice but to destroy this planet." He let out a sad sigh when he said those words. After putting the teacup down once more, Jezebeth lifted his head to take in the orange-tinged blue sky and the enormous sun that was hanging in the sky. Grasping his chin with his hand, he mumbled to himself. "This should be the third last planet that I need to destroy before seizing all of the fragments, right?" There was a trace of uncertainty in his voice as he said these words. As a result of the fact that his memories had not yet been completely restored, he was unsure of the actual number of worlds that remained in his path of destruction. 3 was his current estimate, but it could definitely be more than that. It was necessary to point out that there were a great number of planets in the universe, and that it was not possible for him to destroy them all. The only type of planets he was interested in finding were the ones that concealed the planetary seed, also referred to as Akashic fragments. They were his main source of strength and the key that would lead him to the Akashic records. He was close. He was practically on the cusp of achieving his objective. He had never been this close to actually getting his hands on the records in his entire life, but at the same time he had an exceedingly dreadful foreboding that kept him alert at all times. Just why can't he kill me? Jezebeth realized one thing after recovering part of his memories after consuming additional fragments. Kevin was refusing to kill him. For whatever reason, he seemed adamant about keeping him alive. And it was for this exact reason that made Jezebeth felt uneasy. What exactly are you planning? And what exactly am I missing? No matter how hard he tried to understand what was going on, he just couldn't get his head around it. Could it perhaps be connected to him? Jezebeth had a sudden thought while he drummed his fingers over the table. By him, he was referring to Ren. Thinking about him, Jezebeth also felt that he was abnormal. Although he wasn't exactly sure, he knew that he had a connection with Kevin. The two of them. Could Ren perhaps be someone that Kevin chose to have me killed? A hypothesis formed inside of his mind. However, he readily shook his head after a thought. It was unlikely. Jezebeth had an inkling that all of this was related to the records. They were probably the reason why Kevin refused to kill him. It may be far-fetched, but what if? Jezebeth furrowed his brows. But what if the records have plans to do something significant once I'm no longer around? Due to the fact that I have taken control of so many of their fragments, it's possible that they have become apprehensive of me and maybe every creature in the universe. Do they have some kind of plan in mind that only Kevin knows? One frightening enough to leave Kevin with no choice but to continue regressing over and over again. Is this why he is refusing to kill me? Jezebeth sipped the tea till it was entirely empty. But if that was true, what does Ren have to do with this equation? Jezebeth's brows furrowed. A sudden thought occurred to him and his brows jumped up a little. Wait, what if Kevin's goal is to fight the records? Jezebeth tilted his head a little. All sorts of ideas started to flood his mind at that moment. Since he is both the fruit and the product of the records, it is safe to presume that he cannot harm them in any manner possible. What if Ren was his solution to the problems? What would happen if he surreptitiously transferred his power over the regression such that one day he would end up killing me and... Jezebeth's hand froze once his thoughts paused there. It can't be. Kevin wouldn't be this crazy, right? To undergo so many regressions and have Ren go through so much torture. A heavy silence descended across the area around him as Jezebeth fully submerged himself in his thoughts. It wasn't long before he broke out in an unexpected fit of laughter. PFD. Jezebeth's roaring laughter resounded across the world as he shattered the teacup in his hand. Ha ha ha. Rumble. Rumble. The earth unexpectedly began to rumble and shake at the echo of his laughter. The ground began to fracture and the mountains began to crumble. Suddenly, lava erupted from the depths of the globe and splattered against the expansive plains that comprised the world. In the space of just a few seconds, the world that had been so tranquil moments prior was transformed into a place filled with destruction. And all of this came as a result of one man's laugh. Jezebeth, having last achieved some level of composure, restrained his laughter. What an absurd hypothesis. He thought aloud while he took a look at the surroundings, which were in complete ruin. It was a very absurd hypothesis that didn't quite make sense, yet made sense at the same time. He had never stopped to consider how it was possible for a human being with no connections to the records to become so powerful. After all, the record set a limit for the world for a reason. It wasn't done for the sake of doing it, but rather as a precaution to prevent anyone from ever reaching a level that threatened their existence. It was really strange to think that another human being except Kevin could get to this point. It can also explain why Ren has white hair while Kevin doesn't. He did indeed find it weird that Kevin, who used to have white hair in the past, suddenly had black hair. Was it a strange coincidence or was there more to it? Jezebeth was curious to know. Well, that's too bad. Jezebeth muttered while he looked at the planet. Whatever was happening to the planet was bound to happen anyway. He felt no pity for the inhabitants of the planet that had died during his fit of laughter. Alright, let's wrap this up. Jezebeth stood up from his seat and waved his hand. The end of the world came as a direct result of his seemingly insignificant movement. As the ground continued to press together and lava continued to push its way up from beneath the ground, it was only a matter of time before the world burst. Before the planet imploded, Jezebeth had already vanished into the vastness of space. When he appeared in the space beyond the planet, he held out his hand and beckoned. Come over here. A white seed-like object flew toward the palm of his hand right after. Grasping it with his hand, he smiled and brought it to his face. Ha! A trail of white flew from the seed and made its way into Jezebeth's mouth. The scene was reminiscent of someone sucking a specter-like substance. At the very moment that he ingested the seed, Jezebeth sensed that his vision was beginning to warp, and the world around him began to turn utterly white. Boom, boom. Massive libraries chock full of books suddenly descended from above and spread out in a never-ending spiral around him, encompassing every region of his vision. A single blink from Jezebeth allowed his eyes to focus on a golden light off in the distance. It was at that point that he became aware of a golden book that was lying open in the far distance. It had a golden sheen all around it, and he started to hear muffled mutterings and whispers inside his head. As if in a trance, Jezebeth outstretched his hand. He could feel his heart beating powerfully inside of his head. The records. He mumbled under his breath. The scene before him didn't last long, as the world around him warped and Jezebeth found himself back in the same place as he was before. It took him a while for him to get out of his trance, and his face changed alongside his breathing. I was so close. He desperately mumbled. He was so close to the records. He could still feel the book, which was only a couple of inches away from his fingerprints. Itchy. He grabbed his face with both hands while his body moved up and down. Everything that was in his immediate area began to fall apart at the same time as his short white hair began to grow longer in tandem with his strength. Like a maniac, he continued to mumble. Just a little. Wapa. My eyes opened abruptly and I took a rough gulp of air. I sat up straight and looked about at my surroundings, which were currently covered in fine black powder. Then, closing my eyes once, I sighed in disappointment. Nothing yet. My little session was still not enough for me to break through to the next rank. There was a slight hiccup in the process, but it didn't affect my training in the least. Boom. The surroundings shook again and I stood up from my spot. Stretching my body a little, I took a deep breath and headed out of the room. Of course, I didn't forget to take a potion in order to heal my broken hand. Enough time has passed, it's about time I ended this. Both sides should have lost enough of their forces. Just enough to give reason for the other demons to attack after this wave is done. Chapter 629, End of First Battle. Cough. I coughed several times before finally reaching the castle's upper levels. When I opened the doors that led to the top of the castle, I saw the others standing in the same place I had left them, solemnly and heavily looking into the distance. How is the situation? I asked. After sparing me a glance, Leopold commented. Not good. He was the only one who bothered to acknowledge me when everyone else was too busy observing the situation in the distance. Boom. Boom. The ground continued to shake, and anyone who paid close attention could hear the agonizing screams of the orcs as they struggled for their lives. Seeing the scene, I asked Leopold, how many losses have the orcs sustained? They've lost a couple of legions and are barely holding on. It was Angelica who spoke this time. The orcs' line of defense will break soon. I was just about to call you, but it's good that you came here in time. She added, her eyes squinting and locked in the distance. Emichung. I nodded my head slowly and moved towards the edges of the wall. From my vantage point, which allowed me to survey the entirety of the battleground, I could see how dire the situation was. Indeed, it was exactly as Angelica was describing it. At this point, the orcs were just about managing to hang on. The only reason they were able to survive at the moment was because of Silig and Omgolung, who stood at the front and repelled the marquee-ranked demons. If not for them, the situation would have been extremely precarious, if not hopeless altogether, and every single orc would have perished. Is it our time to finally make a move? Liam's voice, which was tinged with excitement, echoed beside me. Sparing him a glance, I shook my head. There is no our in this situation. The only one that will move is me. Huh. Everyone looked at me with surprised expressions when I said that. Before they could air their grievances, I added, I know you guys want to fight, but now is not the time. The only one that the demons are wary of right now is me. You guys will fight, but you aren't allowed to display a strength that is greater than half of your actual strength. As soon as those words left my mouth, everyone's expression took a sharp turn for the worse. This was especially true for Liam, who appeared to have completely lost his soul. As expected of a battle maniac, I didn't doubt he would have reacted this way in the slightest. Don't worry, you will have plenty of time later to show off your skills. For now, please do as I say. It's the best way to end this farce as quickly as possible. Once I had complete control of the world, there were a lot of things that I wanted to accomplish. Among these things, one of my goals was to move my headquarters here. With the human domain soon to be engulfed in a war, it was no longer as safe as it was in the past. By conquering this planet and with time flowing at a faster rate than on Earth, secretly building my forces for when the Demon King arrives was the most adequate approach. I can even have my parents come here for the sake of safety. Who knows, in the near future I might even be able to build a city. I'm getting too far ahead of myself. Moving my thoughts away from my ambitions which were spiraling out of proportion, I looked in Ryan's direction. Ryan, please head downstairs and get ready to work. Got it. Ryan nodded his head once his eyes met mine. He immediately headed downstairs after he heard my voice. Following him from behind was Angelica, who was now essentially acting as his bodyguard. So we just hold back in the fight? Hein asked while he placed his hand over the fortifications, ready to jump down at any minute. I massaged my chin when I looked at Hein. It won't be a problem if it's him. I swept my gaze over the others and ordered. Everyone apart from Hein has to hold themselves back. You can go all out if you want. He was a tanker anyways. He might attract some attention, but it wouldn't be to the level where the others would be wary. Oh right, Han Yufei, you shouldn't use the Gravar style at all if you can. If you do that, you'll end up getting way too much attention. If there was one person that would stand out the most, it'd have to be Han Yufei. When it came to socializing, he was the most reserved member of the group. However, this only applied to non-combat situations. His power was unrivaled in the heat of battle, especially when it came to encounters of this magnitude. In a situation where there were a lot of enemies, he might even be a lot more useful than I could ever be. And combined with his other body art, let's not think about it. The thought aroused a lot of jealousy. It was only after I took a peek at the Gravar style that I realized how devastating it was. Alright, let's go. After pressing my hand against the walls of the castle, I jumped down and started running toward the vast battlefield. The others followed right after me from behind. Boom. In the center of the battlefield, where the leaders of both sides were engaged in combat, enormous energy blasts shot back and forth between the two camps, obliterating everything that was within their vicinity. Be it allies or enemies, nothing was spared. It was a brutal sight to anyone that watched it. Where is he hiding? Where are you holding the thieves? In the midst of the mayhem, a voice that was both frantic and angry could be heard. It belonged to none other than Azeroth, whose fingers collided with Silig's enormous axe, pushing him several steps back. It was clear from this exchange that Silig was a notch weaker than Azeroth. Kish. As he slid across the ground, Silig groaned in pain and glared in Azeroth's general direction. He remained silent throughout their conflict, much to the annoyance of Azeroth, who responded by attacking with an even greater level of ferocity. Do you not know how much I've waited for this moment? Do you have any idea for how long I've planned this? My target used to be just you, but now that I've found out the truth, I'll make sure to eliminate everyone involved in your little schemes. A potent force erupted from within Azeroth's body, and at the same time his body flashed through the air before materializing next to Silig. Because of how quickly he moved, by the time Silig was able to react, Azeroth was already by his torso and had his hand positioned directly in Silig's abdominal region. Bam! A tremendous force erupted from Azeroth's palm, and Silig's body was hurled all the way back, slamming into the ground as it did so. Boom! A deep crater formed in the area in which he crashed, and the area around him turned silent as the orcs within the vicinity all stopped doing whatever they were doing for a moment. With their leader down, the orcs' morale fell drastically. Ugh! Silig opened his eyes to stare at the ashen gray sky in the distance. At that moment he had very limited control over his body. It seemed as though every single part of his body had been completely crushed, and he had a hard time moving around because of it. No. Yet. Silig tried to force himself up. Hearing the muffled and desperate cries of his kin, he used whatever was left inside of him to force himself up. Even if he ended up dying today, he was only going to leave after he killed Azeroth. At least him. Stay down. But just as he was about to move, he felt a hand press against his shoulder and his body fell back. Silig recognized the voice right away. With a turn of his head, he discovered the same human who had previously saved him standing next to him. When did he get here? Silig wondered in shock. Don't worry about it. I'll take it as that you owe me one again. Rin disappeared from Silig's vision right after he said those words. You. Within a minute of his disappearance, Silig heard the furious rantings of Azeroth's voice. His piercing screech could be heard all the way across the battlefield. The earth began to shake, and off in the distance, two enormous forces collided with each other. In order for Silig to get a clearer picture of the situation, He mustered every ounce of strength he possessed and forced his body to climb out of the crater. As soon as he emerged from the crater, he was overcome with astonishment at the sights that greeted him. "Ah, let's give them a good show, shall we?" Azeroth heard a few faint words in his ears before being flung into the air. Soon after, he heard a sharp whistling noise. The side of his face prickled sharply as a wet sensation trickled down his cheek. Yuk! The wings on Azeroth abruptly expanded, and his body came to a stop in midair as it did so. After finally getting his bearings, he was able to get a better look at the person who was to blame for all of this. Jet black hair, deep blue eyes. You. Azeroth's teeth were clenched tightly together. This was the first time he saw the thief, who had ruined his life many years before, and the boiling rage that he had suppressed for all of those years was about to erupt in a single moment. It took him everything to stop himself from rushing toward his opponent. He was angry but not stupid. He could tell with just a glance that his opponent was strong, and recklessly charging at him would only result in his imminent loss. I'll have plenty of time to torture him after I beat him. The wigs behind his back began to rapidly expand, casting a large shadow on the ground beneath. His overwhelming pressure began to draw out of his body before rushing in the direction of his opponent. When confronted with the terrifying pressure, Rin casually swept his gaze across the battlefield and mumbled something under his breath with a very serious expression. His voice was soft. While it was faint enough that no one could possibly hear it, Azeroth was still able to pick up on what was being said. How should I do this? Should I just let him hit me first and then attack, or should I just pretend to get hurt? Chapter 630, End of First Battle. Phew. I was in a real dilemma at the moment. Azeroth's rank was approximately S rank. It was an impressive rank, but for me, who was one rank ahead of him, his pressure wasn't anything that made me feel threatened. With all my skills and sword art, he couldn't kill me unless I let him hit me. Not only that, but my current goal was to make it appear as if the battle had been hard fought. That meant figuring out how to keep my strength in check while also displaying something good enough for the other demons to believe that getting rid of me now, rather than later, was the best option. How should I do this? Should I just let him hit me first and then attack, or should I just pretend to get hurt? Unknowingly, I began to blurt out my thoughts. Azeroth's glare made me notice this as his figure vanished and reappeared in front of me. Unlike some of the opponents that I faced in the past, he wasn't one to talk much as he directly attacked after hearing my provocative words. He was so quick that it appeared as if he had teleported to me. Clay. I easily parried his blow by extending my sword to the right, where it collided with his sharp claws and produced a deafening metallic ring that reverberated through the air. Yuk! I let out a loud groan and moved back a couple of steps in the air. Pretend to be hurt? With this strength? Azeroth's furious voice reverberated throughout the air, and his figure vanished once more. The next instant he was standing right next to me again. Pathetic. Swoosh. As his claws came hurtling toward my face, I felt a wind that was both chilly and acerbic blow past me. In that split second, I saw a few strands of my hair softly fly in front of my vision, and at the same time, I felt a sharp sting on the area directly below my right eye. Azeroth's figure materialized not long after. You dodged that? He asked in a tone that suggested he was somewhat surprised. In the meantime, I reached up to touch my face and felt a wet sensation on my palm. Blood. His last attack had caused me to bleed. This is much harder than I thought. Not engaging in conflict with him, but rather making the fight seem closer than it actually was. I would have been in a bit of trouble if the chip hadn't told me where to move in order to get grazed. He's coming again. I felt a sudden surge of demonic energy coming from opposite me. Without a doubt, Azeroth was pissed. Once more, his form vanished and then reappeared in front of my very eyes. This time around, he was moving even more quickly than he had in the past. It wasn't just by a little bit. Rather, it was by a quite significant margin. Right eye. At the precise instant that he vanished from view, I cocked my head to the left. His lanky arm materialized in the exact position where my head had been before. Azeroth's eyes widened in surprise. He seemed to want to scream, "How?" But I never gave him time to think about it as I pressed my hand against his chest and pushed. Boom. After I focused some of my mana into my palm, his body was propelled backward at high speeds, only coming to a stop after 8 rings formed behind him. Hyuk. His back arched backward and he let out a painful groan. Shortly after that, pointing my finger in his direction, 4 more rings formed. All 4 pressing down on his wings. I motioned downward with my hand and his body collided with the ground. Boom. A massive crater formed beneath me. H.A. Obviously, I had to make it look as though I was having a tough time. What better way than by breathing heavily? My life would have been so much easier if I paid more attention to the chip inside of my head. Meanwhile, I secretly regretted my decision to only learn to use the chip in the past couple of years. It was only because of the chip inside my head that I was able to accomplish all of this. Based on the direction in which Azeroth's eyes were looking, the path that his body was shifting toward, and the hand that he was raising, I was able to figure out where exactly he was going to try to attack and easily predict his movements. It was a lifesaver. Let's finish this. After a casual sweep of the battlefield, I noticed that the other 3 Reincarnated demons were fighting against Silig and the other Orson chief, still unaware of what had happened. My body began to levitate downwards. After making contact with the ground, I came to a halt in front of Azeroth, who was being restrained by more than 20 distinct rings at the moment. Will 20 rings do? After watching Azeroth for a while and noticing the rings shaking, I finally shook my head and pressed my hand down in the air. A total of 5 additional rings materialized in the air and began to press against his body. The shaking came to a stop. Keish. I could hear Azeroth's groan echo as he struggled with all his might to break free from the hold, but it was a futile effort on his part. He was stuck to the ground after using the second effect of Ring of Vindication, gravity manipulation. He might have been able to escape if there had only been a couple of rings on his body, but with over 25 rings on his body, it was impossible. You. Unable to get out of the restraints, Azeroth glared at me. I cast a brief glance toward the distance where Silig and Omgalug were, and there I saw them working together to stop the Reincarnated demons who had noticed what was going on with Azeroth. It was at this moment that I realized that I needed to hurry, thus I lowered my body a little and whispered to Azeroth. Just know that I'm grateful for the help you've lent me in the past. Had it not been for you, I would have never been able to be as strong as I am today. When I said those words, I pressed my hand down and the ground beneath me cracked. Azeroth's body buckled under the strain, and his core shattered with a flick of my finger. Just like that, Azeroth died and the surroundings came to a standstill. Sheeing. I drew my sword from my waist, unconcerned about the reactions of those around me. Then, pressing my foot against the ground, I propelled my body forward and began attacking all of the other demons. This much should do. Observing the entirety of the battlefield from a gigantic orb were several demons. The demons' attention seemed to waver between the gigantic orb that stood in the middle of the room and the figure that stood at the far end of the room as an eerie and menacing stillness spread throughout the halls that they were in. At this point, it was fairly obvious that the war had come to an end, with the orcs emerging victorious as a result. At that precise instant, everyone's attention was drawn towards a particular figure with black hair and blue eyes that reaped through the hordes of demons inside the gigantic orb. He was like a god of death, stomping and slaying all the demons that were in his immediate vicinity. His face was quite pale, which was a clear indication that he was growing increasingly tired. However, with the assistance of Silig and Omgalug, he was able to continue reaping through the lives of the demons. It's all that human's fault. The silence was broken by a demon. Almost immediately, he began to point the finger of blame for their defeat in the direction of the mysterious human who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Despite the fact that the war was never planned out to begin with and that the army that left was only a small portion of the real army they had, the demons that were present still held an increasing resentment for the human that was in the orb. Had it not been for him, Azeroth and the others should have been able to emerge victorious. Yeah, it's all that human's fault. If he didn't join in, we would have been able to annihilate all of the orcs in one go. As more and more demons joined in on the discussion, the room, which had been relatively quiet before, quickly became noisy. At that precise second, a distinct low-pitched noise could be heard reverberating throughout the entire hall. Immediately after that, a terrifying energy started spreading stealthily throughout the entire corridor, and it immediately rendered the mouths of every demon that was there shut. Prepare yourselves for battle. The figure rose from the throne, and a solemn tone could be heard reverberating throughout the hall as he spoke. Everyone in the room suddenly adopted a solemn bearing and looked at one another while maintaining an expression of grave concern. A demon with deep red eyes, long black hair, 2 large horns, and an elegant bearing stepped forward while grasping a wooden cane in his right hand. Azeroth's sacrifice was not in vain. With this, I'm able to grasp the relative strength of the human that stepped forward. Have all the armies prepare for battle. I will personally take action. The moment it was revealed that he would personally take action, the entirety of the room went into an eerie silence. Stepping down a small flight of stairs, the demon issued another order. Instruct the demons that are fighting to continue fighting. Tell them that if they run away, I will personally ensure that they meet their end. His command caused the numerous demons that were present to become perplexed. Why did he not have the demons retreat and join them later? Why must they continue fighting? Wouldn't that just lead to their death? Was he perhaps still bearing a grudge for going out without his orders? Although they were all perplexed, none of the demons had the courage to express their bewilderment. This was how terrifying the demon that stood in front of them was. Sweeping a glance at the demon delegates, the demon's brows furrowed. A chilling pressure spread throughout the entirety of the hall. What are you waiting for? Yes. One by one, the demons disappeared from their spots, and it wasn't long before everyone was gone, leaving only one person behind. Casting a gaze on the orb and focusing his attention on the human that was displayed on it, the demon mumbled. How did humans manage to enter this planet? Should I relay this to His Majesty? King. 2 demons' necks were severed by my blade as it sliced through them. I reached out with the palm of my hand to grab their cores, and I crushed them between the fingers of my extended hand. I think this is about enough. As I pressed my foot against the ground, the edges of my vision began to blur, and I realized that I was several kilometers away from the battlefield. I could hear the sound of metal clashing in the distance, along with the pitiful shrieks of the demons who were being swatted away like flies by the orcs, who seemed to have been reinvigorated by the deaths of the leading demons. I think I showed just about enough strength. When I noticed that some of the demons were deliberately moving away from me, I decided it was time to leave the battlefield. After putting my sword away and ensuring that everything was in order, I made my way back toward the castle. When I turned around to head back toward the castle, I found that there were no obstacles in my way. I was already back in the building within 5 minutes, and from there I headed toward the lower levels of the castle. I wonder if Ryan is already done. I mouthed my thoughts out loud as I descended a flight of stairs. After I descended to the lower levels, I proceeded forward until I came to an old wooden door. I grasped the old metal handle and opened the door. How long will it take? Not too long, give it an hour. Okay. It was there that I was met with the sight of Angelica and Ryan talking to each other while large metallic wires and panels appeared all over the place. Their heads snapped in my direction as soon as they noticed the door opening. I greeted them while dabbing away some of the blood that was on my body. Looks like you guys are having a hard time.